Good day. I'm glad you can join us for this story on education innovation. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Pieter Pretorius. He is an independent educator contracting for the Gordon Institute of Business Science and the Graduate School of Technology Management. I hope you enjoy this story with us.
The subject that I teach is operations management, and especially on the MBA, many of the students do not really know what to expect of the subject. Most of them, coming from a financial background, normally thinks that operations management is really not a subject that's applicable to them. Therefore, I have to raise some interest beforehand, even before they get to class. I primarily teach on the MBA courses at GIPS and also on the Masters of Engineering Management at the Department of Engineering and Technology Management. Being master's classes, I would really like to spend my time in class to have a good discussion on issues relating to the subject matter, rather than to really convey theory which the students can actually look up for themselves and study for themselves. I lecture to 3 MBA groups of about 70 students each, and the Masters of Engineering Management is 2 groups of about 50 students each. The mini cases consist of 3 different cases. The first one is fairly straightforward, which I will discuss just now. The second one deals with decision making and the organizational structure, and how wrong decision making often influences the performance of the operations function. And the third mini case deals with capacity planning and constraints, and also how the wrong decision making will reduce the performance of the operational function. The mini cases are primarily designed to stimulate thought and probably provoke controversy, and that is becoming the basis for the class discussions. The first mini case is a very simple one where I provide some data. Deals with a product which is sold for 95 Rand per unit. The product cost is given, which is 91.875 Rand per unit, which includes both the variable and the allocated fixed costs. And a fair amount is sold of this product, and the customers are quite happy with it. A new customer comes along and wants to buy this product, but he's got a different perception of value and is only willing to pay 65 Rand per unit as opposed to the 95 Rand per unit which it is normally sold for. But before I chase this customer away, wanting to buy it below my normal selling price and below the product cost, I would ask him a few questions first. And the first question is how many he would like to buy. His answer is, I only want 1. The second question I ask him is whether this actually provides us with a marketing opportunity, and ask him whether he would come back and buy more if the sale is successful. His answer is, there's no possibility that I will buy more, so I'm limited only to this 1 unit sold. The student is now faced with 3 options relating to the information that was given. Option number 1, given this information, I will sell. Second option, given this information, I will not sell. And the third option is, given this information, I will sell conditionally, meaning that I will need to ask a few more questions before I can make this decision. As part of the preparation, they also need to, if they have chosen this option, prepare the questions or the conditions that need to be adhered to should they have chosen this particular option. Most students choose the second option, do not sell. And the argument is that the reason is that they give is that it's so much below the original selling price and is also below the product cost, therefore you cannot make any profit whatsoever. I would say that on average, to all the classes that I teach using this particular case study, the average is probably about 80% of the students choosing the second option, which is obviously wrong if you know how to view this particular problem. The correct answer is the last one, sell conditionally. And the key is to find out what the conditions are under which you sell this unit for 65 Rand despite this product cost being 95.871 and still make a profit. Should you want to know what the real answers are, please come and attend my class and we'll have a discussion about it, and you will discover it for yourself. Because this is the way I do it in class, is I have a discussion with the students so that they can find out the answers for themselves. So what I would be doing is asking a lot of leading questions until they realize that the answer was wrong and what the correct answers are. Once the results are posted on ClickUp and most of the students realize that their answers are wrong, that's when they start thinking about the reasons for giving them their answers. And that's when the discussion starts between the students and myself, directing them to some extent on ClickUp, discussing all these answers that they've given and them not being correct. I then use the mini cases as the basis for discussion in class, asking the leading questions in class as well, having very active discussions, eventually getting to the point where this mini case actually demonstrates that product cost, as being taught in many other courses, is actually a figment in the imagination of cost accountants, and it doesn't exist and should not be used for decision making. The results from the mini cases or the preparation is actually submitted by the students on ClickUp using the quiz tool, which means the marks are immediately available, even though I do not provide them with their own individual marks. I only post on discussions the final results, showing them that there are a lot of students that do not have the right answers, and having this low average actually triggers their curiosity, so that they would be interested in what's going to follow and what might be the right answers. A discussion is then started on ClickUp, raising the question why the performance for the mini cases is so low. And normally the students take part in this discussion quite extensively, because they are really amazed at their low results, having believed that whatever solutions they gave to the mini cases were actually correct, and the stats actually show that they were quite wrong. And then students start justifying certain answers that they've given, and then the discussion lasts for quite a long time, and normally until we start the first contact session. This is actually following a problem-based approach where I give the students problems. They provide me with the solutions. I show them that the solutions are mostly incorrect, and that actually causes them to realize that they need to learn something new, or there is something within the subject area that they can still learn, which they don't yet know. Even some of the experts in that field might not be doing that well in that particular quizzes. Some other theoretical background for the course is provided either as chapters from textbooks or from notes that I've developed myself, which the students need to prepare for the class, which means I don't need to go through that theory in class, saving me time to really spend time on the issues that are important for the subject. Some time is spent, especially in the first contact sessions, to make sure that the theory is understood by the students, and any questions that they might have, either we discuss in class or they might start a discussion where the theory is then discussed and clarified. On the MBA at GIPS, the sessions are 3.5 hours long, 7 of them, so it in total actually gives me very close to 28 hours of contact time. And in those sessions, apart from just clarifying some of the theory, I spend most of my time on having discussions on problems and case studies where the theory is applied and new thinking is actually demonstrated. I start off by focusing on the problems, really understanding the problem before you start looking for a solution in that environment. From the true understanding of the problem, you then have to start looking for first a direction of the solution, which gives you a generic approach, after which the detail of the solution is developed. On the Masters of Engineering Management program, my contact time is less than on the MBA. But being a lot of engineers, they tend to move quicker than the open groups on the MBA, which means I basically do the same amount of work in 2.5 days that I do in 28 hours with the MBAs. The solving of the mini cases is actually what takes most of the time in the class. First of all, looking for what the real problems are, because what they are actually looking for in the mini cases are investigating solutions that might be solving the problem. what I demonstrate through that is that they so focused on solutions rather than really looking for the real problem that often they start missing the real problem and start solving the wrong issues. The mini cases are then used to actually take the students through this whole process. For example, mini case number 3 has got 4 possible solutions, even though I do not state what the problems are, but they do have all sufficient information to be able to identify what the real problems are. The answers that they've given, and that's the reason why they're all wrong, actually demonstrates that they are taking a solution or accepting a solution for a problem which does not exist. And the real problem, which one of the solutions will actually solve, is not identified because that solution is hardly ever chosen. And very often when students do choose that particular option, they choose it for the wrong reasons. One of the theories that gets discussed quite extensively is systems theory, and that allows me to now lead the students through resolving these many cases, to apply the systems theory and the systems principles to find out what the real problems are. The discussion in class starts off by asking the students why they have chosen certain solutions to that particular mini case, and then we have a discussion in terms of why they have chosen those particular solutions. The question is then raised as to which problem they want to solve with that solution, and that's often when they start realizing that they are looking at solutions and not focusing on problems. We then forget about the solutions for the time being and start looking for the real problems within that particular environment. A very interactive discussion follows in class, where I actually lead the finding of the problem by doing some mathematical calculations on the board, but also by asking the relevant questions, which means the students have to come up with what I have to do on the board. What I allow them to do is to do what they would normally do in real life, based on their experience, based on what they've been taught previously, based on their habits, and also based on what the majority normally does. And then we get to a solution where in this particular case the company is not profitable. Then I allow them to make proposals as to what to change, and normally the change leads to a decrease in the profit even further, and that really astonishes them. We then start investigating what seems to be very counterintuitive, what you really shouldn't be doing, but at that point in time they are willing to explore any possibility. And when you explore the counterintuitive action, you actually find that the system or this organization becomes profitable. At this point in time, the students really realize that their current thought patterns are actually giving them the wrong results, and what's not very obvious or what's counterintuitive actually gives much better results. And that really opens up for change, because the change I introduce in terms of the theory, to most of them are quite radical. And if I was to start out on the first contact session or in the study guide to tell them the paradigm shift I would expect them to make, at this point in time they would have kicked in heels. But having led them into that realization and not telling them beforehand, the change takes place much easier. This session is normally followed up by some more case studies, but these are the more classical case studies. What we often do is to analyze the case study in the traditional way, getting a certain result, and then doing the case study using the new knowledge that has been obtained and getting much different results, which means that the classical way of analyzing the case, or the classical solution for the case, is often different to a much better solution. I think this makes students realize that they need to look at the world around them differently, look at organizations differently, for what they really are, being systems and not categorized in certain theories which may or may not be appropriate. And I think the biggest learning that takes place is that there is much more in a system than what normally meets the eye, and there's a certain way of logic that is required to really understand what the system is all about. I also use the selective release facility of clickUP quite extensively. As I have the contact sessions, I normally pre-program clickUP to release certain material during the time that we have the contact session. so that the material that I promised the students in class is actually available the moment they go on to ClickUP, the moment they leave the class. Students normally have to do an individual and a group assignment, which all have to be submitted on ClickUP. I make use of the two cut-off dates. The first cut-off date allows the student to be scored normally, and everybody's got a week's grace in terms of handing in, but there's a condition to using that week extension, and everybody has it from day one. If you were to use your extension period, you will only be marked out of 50%. The reason why I do that is to encourage students not to make use of any grace period. They also don't have to bother me anymore for asking for extension. I don't have to keep track of any extension, which means it frees up my time to really attend to academic matters rather than administrative matters. Most students now do submit on time. Also means they start submitting much earlier. And the moment ClickUP notifies me of a student having submitted, I now start marking it in much smaller batches. For some assignments, I would have had all the assignments marked right at the cutoff date and time. This is actually demonstrating to the students that I'm practicing what I'm preaching. It's a principle in operations management to process smaller batches more often, and the sooner students submit, the smaller the batch is, and the more my load is spread equally over a longer period of time, instead of having a large batch to process at one time, which normally causes the lead time to extend. The fact that the students now start submitting so much earlier also means that my load is spread much more equally over time, and for some of the assignments, especially the smaller ones, I have gotten it down to this fine art of providing the students with all their feedback on the submission date, which means there's no delay for marking and marks after the submission date. After the contact sessions, I give the students a number of problems that they can go and practice, and I also promise them that one of the problems that is in this problem set will be in the exam, which means they are going to do it. I don't provide them the solutions, I only provide them with the answers, which means they can check their answers but not exactly how the solution is to take place. Lots of discussions are going on ClickUP afterwards, students communicating with one another. I would be checking all the discussions mostly on a daily basis, and wherever I feel the need where somebody might be off the track, I might give some limited input by maybe asking a question, not necessarily giving an answer to a student's problem. What is quite amazing is that the amount of discussions tend to slow down the closer we get to the exam. Normally a lecturer is flooded with questions just before the exam. In my case, it doesn't happen. It seems to slow down very much as we progress towards the exam, and it seems, that's my assumption, that the students are confident enough that they've done sufficient learning so that when they get to the exam that they would be able to actually do quite well. Average is more or less 60-65% for the exam. It's always less than for the semester mark. I have the policy of making sure that everybody will have a good semester mark, but if you want to earn a distinction, you're going to earn it in the exam. So the exam is always a bit more difficult, leading to a smaller average than the semester mark. But I still tend to get 10-15% distinctions, and there are still maybe 5-10% of the students that fail. And that's life. I really support the use of ClickUP. It's made my life much easier. I've won the paper war. No assignments are submitted in hard copy anymore. Everything is done electronically, and that makes my life much easier. It makes traceability easier. I've invented a file naming convention so that I would know exactly which student is from which group, which year, and for which assignment. So if any queries come along, I would be able to find an assignment quite easily. Without ClickUP, I think I would not have been as effective in my teaching. The use of ClickUP is quite important to me because a lot of the things that you have to do in class can now be done outside of the class. It saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of preparation, saves a lot of interaction with the students, which can be done at the outside of the class or outside of the class. I do not develop the whole website in the beginning of the semester. I only put on the website what is necessary for the initial phases, and as it goes along I would be adding more content as required. The implication is that I can always have the latest, especially when it comes to student notes. I might be making it available just before 2 or 3 days before the contact session, so it would be the most updated version.
Thank you, Pieter, for sharing this very interesting story with us. I hope everybody now has a few more ideas and strategies that you will follow to challenge your students in your face-to-face environment and also online. Good luck!